Hello. My name is Mark Neuenschwander. If you're from Switzerland, it's Neuenschwander or something like this. My friends call me Noosh. Some of you got onto LinkedIn. Oh, my presentation isn't on. Hold on. That's not it, brother. That's from Brazil. Anna Paula, where are you? I said Brazil. Is that a good sign that we're getting the wave in the back there?
The screen is green. I don't know why. Not green.
Ah, there you go. Ooh, really? That's it, eh? Oh, no. You want to try another adapter?
Maybe, yeah.
So these two guys were walking their dogs, and once they were, one said to the other, let's get something to eat. One guy had a Rottweiler, the other guy had a little Chihuahua. And the guy with the Chihuahua says, man, no one's going to let us in the restaurant. This is America. You can't take pets into restaurants. He says, oh, no. Just ignore that sign. He says, follow me. Do what I do. Give me a minute, do what I do. So he put on some colored glasses, and he walked up with his Rottweiler, and he says to the maitre d', I'd like a table, please. And the maitre d' says, well, sir, there's no pets allowed. He says, pets? This is a guide dog. He says, a Rottweiler's a guide dog? He says, hey, it's New York. You need guidance and protection, okay? And so the guy with the Chihuahua is watching this, just going crazy. Go, oh, man. So he gets the courage, puts on some colored glasses, and he walks up with his little Chihuahua. And he says, I'd like a table, please. And the maitre d' says, I'm sorry, no pets allowed. He says, what do you mean pets? He says, this is my guide dog. He says, yeah, right, a Chihuahua's a guide dog? He says, damn, they gave me a Chihuahua? Do you want to use my adapter? Did you find mine? Do you want to use mine?
So, Mark, that bag's full of your standard adapters, are they?
I'm sorry, huh?
That adapter's full of your standard that bag is full of your standard adapters.
Yes. Yes. By the way, I don't see, is Jay here? Jay, I had a question that I didn't get to ask you. Okay, how old are you in FDA years?
Is that like dog years?
Yeah. It might be.
Like 25.
Okay, good. That's real good. Yeah.
How old are you in FDA years?
Brother, from another galaxy. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I just want to tell you guys, I'm toast. If there's no PowerPoint, I'm toast. Okay, we're going to start over. Hello, my name is Mark Neuenschwander. My friends do call me Noosh. Some of you went on to LinkedIn and were pretty excited about meeting me. Thought I was pretty hot. This young guy with hair, good looking, from Switzerland. I am Swiss, pure Swiss, out of Bern like he is, out of Neuenschwander up in the hills. But this is Mark with a C. I'm Mark with a K. Someone sent me a fun thing on Facebook the other day. They went to Starbucks and they said, I said my name was Mark with a C. Now, dude, both those things are medication errors waiting to happen. That is a medication error when you get the wrong name on the coffee. I'm sure this is how you feel right about now. You've been sitting a lot and you've been listening a lot. I'm sure, but you're here. My goodness, you're here on this last session. A friend of mine told me about a pharmacy meeting he was at where the second to the last presenter, a hospital pharmacist, stood to speak, and there was only one person in the crowd, another pharmacist. Everyone else had left early. Nevertheless, he enthusiastically delivered his prepared speech. The whole thing used every minute allotted. And when he was finished, this audience of one moved rather quickly to the front and thanked him for a fine presentation and commended him and said how impressed he was that even if only one person showed up, he would deliver the whole thing. And soaking up the praise, the speaker put out his hand and he said, I don't believe we've met. Who are you? And the attendee said, I'm the closing speaker. Ulrich, I love you, but why do you do this to me? I want to begin my talk with my signature video. Well, I've been thinking about rabbis, vacuum cleaners, Harry Potter, grocery stores, Amazon, and a whole bunch of other things. Oh yeah, and barcoding at the point of care. During a radio interview, a seasoned rabbi was asked, what would you say is your greatest strength? Now, what man of the cloth wants to answer that and appear to not be humble? But without hesitation, he said, my greatest strength? In 70 years, I haven't quit. The interviewer immediately asked, well, what might you say is your greatest weakness? Well, who wants to answer that question? Didn't bother him at all. He said, I'd have to say my greatest weakness is that very often I feel like quitting. That rabbi's answer summarizes the past 2 decades of my life. More on that as we move along, but enough to say for right now that I started doing what I'm doing when I was in my prime, back when pictures were still black and white and I had hair and wasn't all that bad looking. And at that time, I was introduced to research that exposed the frightening rate of medical errors in America, in America's hospitals. Research that reported 1 in 5 medication administrations resulted in an error. Additional research from the Institute of Medicine later on, which you're so familiar with, 1.5 million preventable adverse drug events each year. David Bates adds a side commentary saying Yeah, it's more like 1 preventable ADE per 10 patients. And then they say over 7,000 lives lost each year to preventable adverse drug events. The Institute of Safe Medication Practices argues, no, it's more like 10,000 lives. That's one of these going down every 3 or 4 weeks. Where were you last night? If those things sank every 3 or 4 weeks, we would have been at a different venue. I wouldn't have been at the party. I don't know about you. Well, we survived that, but how about going home? It's an Airbus 330 going down every 2 weeks. None of us would fly if that were the case. I was in New Zealand last month with the New Zealand Hospital Pharmacy Association. What a great group of people. And this woman, Elizabeth Black, is one of my new heroes. She has been fighting the barcoding fight in New Zealand for well over a decade. They had great promise of seeing barcoding funded by the government, and then it just disappeared on them. $35 million just disappeared. And 7-8 years later, they're still hoping. She did a 3-hospital, or at least participated some way in a 3-hospital study that when she extrapolated out the data, could easily conclude that in New Zealand, a pretty small country, there were as many as 2,500 deaths from medication errors. My gosh, even if it's only half that, that's a lot. Compared to 321 highway deaths, and that's where all the concern and the money goes. She has a point. She's a revolutionary. She's a champion. You're going to hear from this woman. She's going to set New Zealand on its heels. Shortly after being arrested by the state of medication errors in the U.S., I read an article from the May 1991 issue of the American Journal of Hospital Pharmacy that changed the trajectory of my life. In it, the author dared to imagine how barcode technology could make the medication use process safer in our hospitals. This was before anybody else was thinking about it. The article was entitled Use of Barcodes in Inpatient Drug Distribution. And here is the portion that literally jumped off the page for me. He said, professionals entrusted with the delivery and administration, okay, the logistics through the hospital and the administration of pharmaceuticals have a fundamental responsibility to identify and implement interventions that may improve safe patient quality outcome measures and also reduce overall healthcare costs. These inventions include the timely and judicious use of therapeutic and technological advances. We know that barcoding makes a difference, almost as well as we know that seat belts make a difference. And if we know that, do we not have a fundamental responsibility to use those technologies for the well-being of our patients, not to mention their caregivers? Soon, compelled into, I would say, a mission that involved doing what I could do to promote the adoption and proper use of barcoding to prevent medication errors. I don't know how I got into that. I was just compelled into it. I'm not a pharmacist. I'm not a nurse. I had no experience in this. I was born in a hospital. I've had a few surgeries. That's my experience. But as a common person, it made total sense to me. And it grabbed me by the back of the neck, and I found myself not even planning on doing it, but that's what I've done these last 20 years. And early on, I joined a handful of other voices crying in the wilderness, including leaders from then UCC, Uniform Code Council, your birthing organization. We found ourselves, along with John Trilliger and John Roberts and others, and we found ourselves preaching, literally preaching, to America's hospitals to repent and prepare a way for barcoding at the point of care. A year or two into the millennium, awash with enthusiasm, I predicted that by the year 2010, 80% of hospitals in America would be scanning at bedsides. Nostradamus here. 80% by 2010. I even told my colleague, Jamie Kelly, when we reach the 80% scanning rate for patients and medications at the point of care, I'm going to get a barcode tattoo. Well, maybe when we reach 90%, I said. She said, well, you decide the percentage and I'll decide where we put the barcode. I said, well, I think I'll handle that one myself, and I won't show you any pictures of her idea, but here's my idea. Nice, safe, little data matrix code right there. You'll be able to scan me and it'll say noosh. Well, it took a lot longer than I had imagined. At 2010, we were more than halfway short of my prediction. Did I mention to you that I felt like quitting along the way? But somehow, enough of us found a way to hang in there, to go the distance. And today, over 90% of U.S. hospitals are scanning most patients and most medications prior to administration. Now, every hospital can go deeper and broader than they have, and they're working on that. But we're pretty encouraged by that. But we've only just begun. By my Google skills, I've discovered that America is only 5% of the world's population. That's a tiny slice of people who matter no more nor less than we do. We got a long way to go. And I am so happy that I have found you people, and without any qualifications of any kind, you have taken me in. And together, though I am not formally with you, together we are imagining the rest of the world, or should I say, imagining one world, one standard, one vision. But you've also rolled up your sleeves. You're not just imagination people. You've rolled up your sleeves, and you're realizing the vision. You're implementing. And I like being part of you. Yeah. New Zealand, just pick one nation out of here. So small you can't, yeah, you can see it down there. Did you know that they're tired of their flag? It looks too much like Australia's. I mean, it takes a real skilled person to know the difference. It's not even a Rorschach test. I mean, they look the exact same. So they've asked people to submit flags, and there were 40 kind of finalists, and they had a runoff election, and it's now down to 4, and they're going to choose between, I think, 2 of these and the one that they have now. And I want you to know that I submitted a design for the flag, and I brought it with me. And I understand that it was actually published in a magazine there, my submission. And I think you're going to like it. Ready? Now, I want that puppy to fly over New Zealand. And I want you to go home and design a flag for your country. I want the barcode flag, the barcode cause to fly over every country. I want you to know that I thank God for the early visionaries and the present-day activists of your organization. And we all hoped that we would be a lot farther along than we are now. Sometimes our progress seems to be at glacial speed. And if you're new to this vision and you're all excited about it, let me warn you, like the rest of us, you will discover that the mission requires more than imagination and enthusiasm. I'd say at least half of it is staying power. Just staying. Staying. I would like to share with you a few things that have helped me refrain from quitting thus far. Looking back, looking at the evidence, and looking ahead. That's my outline. Don't panic when I spend most of my time on looking back. I see the clock. I have found that staying power for me comes, first of all, from recalling the perseverance required for point of sale success. The perseverance it took for barcoding to get from the barcode being invented until it is ubiquitous and the language, the global language of business. Let me go back in time to the year before I was born, 1947. We had recovered sufficiently from all the war and expensive war. It was the baby boom generation. I'm right there at the beginning. It was a time of prosperity, and grocery stores had lines that were so long, grocers didn't know what to do. A grocery executive went to Drexel University in Philadelphia and said to the dean, "We need some kind of electronic system for getting people through the grocery line." And the dean didn't have any idea what to do. But there were two fellows listening from the side named Joe Woodland and Bernard Silver. They had been in the war. They actually were part of the Manhattan Project, and they were told that the Manhattan Project was to find the cure for cancer. And after the war, they discovered that it was something else, that it was taking life, not saving life. But they rolled up their sleeves, mind you, no idea that they would have any impact on health care. They rolled up their sleeves and thought, we can come up with a machine-readable some code and machines of some kind. We can do that. That was in 1947. 1948, I was born. This is my mother holding me, and there's my brother in Huntington Beach, California. About this same time, Joe Woodland was on a beach in Miami. And as a kid, he was thinking about this problem. And as a kid, he had done Morse code. And he drew some Morse code in the sand while he was sitting on the beach. And he never could explain how it happened, but he found himself pulling his fingers down and realized that thick and thin lines just might be a code that a machine could read. His invention, which he came up with in 1948, it wasn't patented till later, in 1952, was a bullseye barcode. Thick and thin lines radiating out. Scanners were way too big. They were bigger than cash registers. They sold the patent for $10,000 and then went to work for IBM. The barcode lay dormant for 25 years. And in 1971, the Grocer Council went to leading technology companies and said, come up with a barcode. We can read things now. Come up with a code that they didn't say barcode, a code that a machine could read. And a lot of people from different companies submitted their proposals, just like people submitted their flags in New Zealand. And one fella named George Lauer, who is a good friend of mine now. By the way, I just want to say, look at this bullseye code. This is on a can when they did experimenting with the bullseye code. They saw, because it was redundant and so big, then they tried, slicing it through the middle. But George Lauer got to thinking about this, and look at that machine. Doesn't that scare you, the scanner? Looks like it'll radiate the meat or something. George Lauer got to thinking about it, and he turned the bullseye barcode into what we now call the UPC code. He had no idea that he was making history. It's so fun to talk to him and about his visits to the hospital with his wife and how they scanned her barcodes. He had no idea that what he was. It gives me chills thinking about it. And then 2 years later, the first grocery was scanned. It was that pack of Wrigley's chewing gum. It was a 10-pack, by the way, 69 cents, I believe. And I've talked to this lady, Shirley, a couple times on the phone. Oh, she's a hoot. She had no idea that she was making history. Don't think of fanfares and banners. This was not like a launch to the moon. This happened in a quiet store in Troy, Ohio, and they had a few balloons and stuff, but she had no idea what was going on. So the first was scanned in 1972, but don't get too excited, because here's what Fortune magazine had to say about it. Initial barcode adoption was so anemic that in 1976, Business Week published an article headlined "The Supreme Scanner That Failed." Experts had predicted 1,000 stores would have scanners by that point, but only 50 had installed the costly equipment. Geez, I got closer on my prediction than they did. No small reason, no small barrier was, a minor problem, that groceries didn't have barcodes. It required, if a store was going to go to barcoding, they had to have a hive of bees in the back stock room putting barcodes on everything. And they had these guns with tape on them, and they'd slam the barcode down, and they may have had, 100 of these at different prices, but everybody was back there working their butts off to get barcodes so that they could be scanned at the front. And that just didn't make sense to a lot of people. A guy named Bill Sellmeyer, he's here on the right, George is on the left. Bill Sellmeyer went to his boss and said, hey, it's really cool that we have scanners and barcodes, but he says, we got a problem, there's no barcodes on any of the products. His manager says, okay, well, you defined your job description. And almost single-handedly, Bill Sellmeyer talked the grocery industry into barcoding at the source. And had that not happened, barcoding at the point of sale would not have happened half as rapidly as it did. Though the first 5 years were very slow after that tipping point of the grocers agreeing to label, the first 5 years were pretty slow. But the next 5 years were pretty rapid in adoption. And within a decade, by 1995, virtually all items at grocery and drugstores had barcodes on them. And then by 1990, just 5 years later, not only Cheerios and Tums, but high heels and wrenches, like everything. But it took 15 years. "40 years after the barcode was invented, 15 years after the first grocery was scanned. Friends, every worthwhile in life takes longer than we think. I like that line from Out of Africa where Meryl Streep says, perhaps God made the earth round so we can't see too far ahead. How wonderful naivete is. My gosh, I wouldn't have had 5 kids if I would have known that I was going to have 14 grandkids and have to raise the 5 on the way. But I'm so glad I did. Naivete can get us to do a lot of things. Yeah, the earth is round. You can't see far ahead. Whether you want to or not, you can't. Maybe that's by design. Soon barcode scanning was being applied to rental cars, manufacturing, logistics. 1986, FedEx introduced barcodes and scanners at points of collection and delivery. Didn't reach its full potential till 15 years later. At the turn of the millennium, barcodes were being scanned nearly everywhere on everything except in hospitals And everything had barcodes except medications that showed up at hospitals. Oh, there was barcoding at hospitals. It was in the gift shop. The first barcode didn't appear on a medication until 1991. It was a few. It was like a dozen from, I think it was Pfizer and Abbott. Thought they'd give it a try, but I don't know why there were no scanners. The second thing that keeps me going is retracing the path to point-of-care barcoding in hospitals in the U.S. To just recall the history. The first attempt at barcode scanning to match patients, patient identifiers, and medications happened at a VA hospital in Topeka, Kansas. And I almost always have to show this picture of Sue Kinnick. I never met Sue. She died before her vision there was completed. But it was her imagination and it was her grit and staying power that really brought barcoding to the hospitals of the world. She was in Seattle at a nurses' conference and she checked in a rental car and they scanned her windshield and said, "Mrs. Kinnick?" And she goes, "Yeah." She says, "Do you want to keep this on your credit card?" And she goes, "Yeah." And they said, "Okay." And they gave her a receipt and she keeps standing there and she says, "How'd you do that? How does that work?" And all the way, her daughter tells me she almost missed her flight. And all the way home, she was thinking about this. And she had this slow boiling epiphany on the airplane. Said, "Why can't we do that with our patients and their medications?" She went back to her IT department and says, "Here's what we have to do." And she pushed, and she pushed, and she pushed, and they teamed up, and they were the first to barcode. And soon, the head of the VA saw what they were doing and was so enthusiastic about it, he says, "Okay, in 2 years, we're all going to do this." Well, it took a little bit longer than that, but within just a little more than 2 years, all 170 VA hospitals in the country were scanning at the point of care. However, it should be noted that they were also having to label all of their medications. And that had a lot of problems, and that gave bad press in the early days to barcoding. However, over the next 5 years, barcoding experienced, I shouldn't say however, over the next 5 years after they implemented, barcoding experienced virtually no growth. A lot like retail in its first 5 years. Too expensive. Way fewer adopted than we thought. By 2004, let's go up the ladder, up the calendar here. By 2004, though, 1/3 of medications were barcoded for hospitals. Now, not all of them were usable, but it was an advance. It was pretty good. But 1/3 still wasn't enough. Like retail before, we wanted barcoding at the source. We had to settle for it at the hospital. 3% of hospitals. Okay, I've been thinking about vacuum cleaners too. Selling this vision, preaching this gospel, has been a bit like I imagine selling vacuum cleaners would have been in their early days. And I know, I feel like I'm an expert on this because I've watched this episode of Abbott and Costello. But here they are getting trained in selling vacuum cleaners. Okay, look, I was courteous and I smiled. I didn't have a lot of doors necessarily slammed in my face, but I didn't have any buyers either. It was a slow market, and if my living would have depended on adoption, I would have been bankrupt by now easily. It was hard to find people that would buy into the vision. But you know what? It had such a hold on me, I couldn't quit talking about it. Yeah, I was getting nowhere, but speaking of doors being slammed, it reminds me of an episode from the Three Stooges. I don't have the film, but I do have the picture. It's an episode where the three of them were trying to get through a door at the same time. It's actually a business term used, the Three Stooges effect, where everybody's trying to get through at once. Well, we had the opposite problem with barcoding. Though we could realize a safer medication use system for walking through the door, none of the key players were willing to walk through it. The technology companies that had already proven you could do it in retail were not interested in adapting their systems to healthcare, not until hospitals were ready to buy them. And hospitals were not going to buy them scanning technology if there were no barcodes to scan. And manufacturers said, well, we're not going to add barcodes until people are scanning. And so it was a comedy of errors. After you, no after you, no after you. It wasn't a bottleneck. It was a standstill. It was a stalemate. What do we do now? And we would have stood there forever had somebody not walked through. Again, similar to retailer, we had a hive of bees in the hospital basements putting barcodes on medications of the few takers of the vision. Notice that they didn't quit. So we learned early on that having medications barcoded at the source, labeled by manufacturers, was to scanning in healthcare what electricity is to vacuuming a living room floor. And finally, we changed our strategy and said, we've got to convince the FDA to require the manufacturers to put barcodes on their products. And you can talk to Jay afterward, and he can tell you stories about people at the FDA that when they heard my name didn't want to answer the phone. A lot of us lobbied hard, and finally we found some ears. We convinced the FDA that it was the right thing to do. It took several years to get them to do it, but they did issue a mandate in 2004 that required barcodes with NDC numbers on all immediate drug containers. Now, I'm using my language very carefully. This is FDA language. On all immediate drug containers, not on all unit doses, on all immediate drug containers. A unit dose is not determined by the manufacturer. Unit dose is determined by the physician. It might be 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams. That means you might have to give 2 pills or cut 1 pill. But they never got into dosing. The FDA didn't. They just said every immediate package. Now, an immediate package would be a blister with 1 pill in it. It would be a bottle with 100 pills in it. It would be a syringe, a vial, a tube, a big bottle, a bag, anything that touched the drug product, so that it could make it all the way to the point of care is what we wanted, and keep its identity's integrity. And so, in a nutshell, the FDA rule went into effect in 2006. It could be a GS1 or a HIBIC linear code. NDC numbers, lot, and expiration were not required, and manufacturers were not required to package in ones. And that proved to be really important. We learned that pills don't kill people like liquids do, and you have to give people handfuls of pills. And if the manufacturers didn't make single blister pills, they only gave bottles, we had good barcode-driven technologies to package our own. We didn't have to unblister them to do it either, because we could get the bottle. And you know, I thought the FDA was really dumb by requiring a linear code. And I said, no, don't limit it to a linear code. Now, they're not limiting it now. They're letting technology drive it. And that's the right thing. There's a time and a place for everything. But in the early days, if they would have let manufacturers put any barcode on there that they wanted, we would not have been out of the gate, because people only had scanners back then. So it was brilliant on their part. And that was the domino effect. And by 2015, now we're at 90%. But it was the FDA rule that tipped the dominoes, that broke the dike, that made it happen. I get strength to continue by retelling the stories. You've had a lot of great stories here this week. You're good storytellers, all of you. It's because you have good stories to tell. Retelling the stories of harm done and lives lost, which barcoding could have prevented. We can't forget those stories. Let me tell a few. These are 2 vials of heparin. One is an adult dose, one is a pediatric dose. The adult dose is 10 times the strength of the pediatric. You can tell they look alike. They even sound alike. Heparin, Heplock. It's like when I go to the store and those 2 bottles of milk there, one is non-fat and one is 1%. And it's easy for me to get home with the wrong one, even though hey, they're both blue. Come on, they're both the same size. I mean, and the same problem over there in Brazil, Anna Paula. Look at this from your grocery store. They look alike. Easily you could mix those up. Well, it's okay if you mix up the milk, but not if you mix up Heplock and heparin with children. In this case, twins. There's another thing. How do you know which twin is which twin there? Identifying the patient. These happen to be Dennis Quaid's twins. They're no more special than any other kid in the world. But isn't it interesting? They got all the press because he was a movie star. Well, okay, I'm glad, good, we have a poster child. But, it's disaster when it happens to any child. And it happened to these 2. They almost bled out. They were in one of the finest hospitals in the country, one of the finest pharmacies in the country. And you know what could have prevented that error? Two things could have prevented that error. By the way, if that isn't enough, shortly after this, and not even a year after this, 3 babies died at the exact same medication error in Indianapolis. You would have thought we'd learned. And here's what happened. The medication automated dispensing machine was loaded incorrectly. Where Heplock was supposed to go for pediatrics, someone put adult doses by accident. The nurse put in Heplock, the machine opened, it took her to the right compartment, she assumed she had the right thing, it looked like it. If they would have scanned the product when they put it in to match it, this error would have been avoided. These errors in both cases. Or if they would have scanned at the point of care, they would have intercepted it. So barcodes have a good argument even before we have scanning at the point of care. Scanning along the chain in the hospital can prevent errors too. This is a very dear friend of mine, Julie Tao. I interviewed her in 2007 after her involvement in a medication error in Madison, Wisconsin in 2006. She had 25 or 30 years of exemplary service. It was her life passion to help mothers in bringing babies into the world and caring for her patients. I've not met a more compassionate, lovely woman. And she had worked 2 shifts. She was tired. She went home and rested, came back and worked another shift because they were short on staff. She grabbed the wrong bag on a shelf. And it wasn't necessarily a high-risk bag, but she grabbed the wrong one, and that caused her to give the medication via the wrong route. And within minutes, a 16-year-old mother was dead and a little baby was motherless. God bless that child. So sad about the mother. And God bless Julie Tao. She says, I don't mean to diminish the incredible tragic loss of my patient, but there was more than one death that day. Everything, all of who I was, died. When you're telling the stories, would you tell the story of the caregiver too? It's not just about patient safety. It's about caregivers, protecting them. We need them. They're precious. And when they make an error, they become the second victim of that error. Consider Kimberly Wyatt. Again, 25 years of exemplary service at Children's Hospital in Seattle, taking care of little Kaya. She gave the right drug, but the wrong dosage to this little girl and killed her. Not because she wanted to kill the baby. She loved children. She gave her life for children, but she made a mistake and the baby died. 3 months later, she took her own life. Why? Barcoding could have prevented that. For much less money than they would have spent for fancy dispensing machines, for example. Mind the gap. You've been to England, Britain, you know it's everywhere. I want this picture to stick in your mind. Wherever you dispense the drug and wherever you administer it, there's a gap in between, and barcoding ensures that that gap is filled and we don't fall through. Scanning at the point of care. What is a life worth? Here's the bill from my birth. 3 days in the hospital, patient and care of baby, OB patient, care baby, $52, laboratory fee, $5, circumcision, $5, that's kind of high. Drugs, 45 cents, wow. $62.45. My dad paid $60, he still owes $2.45. I saw this, I said to my dad, hey, you get what you pay for. What are lives worth? When the Quades left the hospital, they would not have done anything other than put their baby in the best car seats and put them in the safest automobile possible. Unlike Britney Spears, I mean, the people would have gone crazy if he would have not put the kids in there right, like they did when Britney Spears drove off with her kid fleeing the paparazzi. I think she's Canadian, by the way. My daughter puts her kid, my grandson Georgie, in that car seat faithfully, and she better, But here's a picture of one of my other grandkids. He's not wearing anything but a barcode. Maybe that's prophetic. But, you know, is it any less important to scan a baby before we give it heparin than it is to put it in the car seat before we take off? Observe this picture for a moment, would you? Just see what you can see. I'm going to give you a test. Okay, ready? Where am I? Subway. What am I drinking? Thank you, good. Now let's watch the full video. Okay, it's called a suicide, my kids tell me. Kamikaze or whatever. You didn't know what was in that. I could have handed it to you. You could, based on this video, and you would have thought you had Dr. Pepper. Here's another thing you see when you go to the UK. They put it there for us Americans, I'm sure. You know, a red bus slamming into your right side could ruin your vacation. And so they're real nice to do this. And I put this here for a reason, and to tell you that for years I was concentrated on the point of care. And that's still really important to me. But unknown to us, we were being blindsided by the clean room. We should have been looking right and left. Go with me into the clean room for a minute. Here's a bunch of look-alike, sound-alike drugs, different strengths. People are eyeballing this and eyeballing that, and they get it wrong just as often as I get milk wrong. A 5-hospital observational study on the accuracy of prepping small and large volume parenterals. Error rate 9%, meaning almost 1 in 10 products was prepared incorrectly prior to dispensing. That doesn't mean all of them were lethal, but that's a high error rate. Amazon.com compounds orders. Hospitals make IVs where they put this and that in. Amazon puts this and that in their boxes. So if you order Harry Potter and a hardcover and it comes as a soft cover, that's okay. It's still the Goblet of Fire. You're okay. But if it comes in German and you speak Portuguese, that's not so good. Or if the guy gets mixed up and he gives you a book by Harry Porter entitled Wolf, so what? Big deal, right? You know what Amazon's error rate is? 0.001. My gosh! For books, we get it right. Scanning during preparation may be more important than scanning at administration. I never thought I would have thought that. If I meet a hospital that doesn't have scanning at the point of care, maybe they don't even have an information system to do scanning at the point of care, I say put it in your clean room. Because if this isn't right, scanning at the bedside cannot detect it, nor can it fix it. We don't know. The nurse doesn't know what's in that bag, unless there's a goldfish swimming in, and then we have another problem. There's technology for this. It starts with workflow management software. It requires the technicians to scan the containers to make sure they have the right container, and the diluents, and then the drugs. And they cannot move if they get any of it wrong. It's a forcing function. And then they have to weigh to verify the correct amount was put into the admixture before and after injecting and drawing. You know, grocery stores, we know this technology already, right? You scan, it tells you what you got, you put it on the scale and it weighs it to tell you how much you're buying or if you have the wrong product on there. These technologies are available at a very modest price with a very high return. They produced then an auto-generated barcode label for application only if the doses comply. Now, you know what this needs? It needs all the products coming into the hospitals to have barcodes from the manufacturer so that we can scan them and then make our own recipe that maps back to those and accurately reflects what the doctor ordered. 2006, Eric Kropp was on duty. Their computers had gone down. He had several people that didn't show up. Technicians were putting together IVs. He was approving them. How can he tell what was in the bag any more than the nurse can? He didn't see it being made, but he checked it, signed it off, and it went to little Emily Jerry, who was there after a series of successful treatments. She had one more treatment to go home. She was already clean, but they thought, let's just do one more, and so she could go home for her 3rd birthday. And they did one more treatment, and you know the story. A bad IV, the IV was not mixed correctly, and Emily Jerry died. Eric Kropp ended up in jail, lost his license, lost his life's passion. We lost a pharmacist, and we lost a little girl. In Corpus Christi, 2008, there were some more heparin errors, believe it or not. But this time, it was in the bag where the error occurred. 17 children were given the wrong doses. 2 died. And mind you, this is not only for high-risk drugs. This is Loretta McPherson. The newspaper said she was an elderly woman who had surgery in Seattle at the Swedish hospital, and then I read on and realized she was 5 years younger than me. She went home to Bend, Oregon, to a fine hospital area, and had a fine hospital as her home hospital. And she was having anxiety, so she went into the ER. And the doctor prescribed fosphenytoin for her, which is a sedative, anti-seizure medication. And it was barcode labeled and sent to the floor. They scanned it. It matched the order. They gave it to her. Half hour later, she was dead. When they traced everything down, they realized that somebody in the preparation room accidentally took hold of rocuronium, which is a paralyzing agent, instead of fosphenytoin. Now, you could easily say, oh, with fosphenytoin, we don't need to check like we do with other drugs. Yeah, you do. You might have rocuronium in your hand. Do these things look alike? Do they sound alike? Come on, fosphenytoin and rocuronium, it sounds about as much alike as Neuenschwander and Crowley. These don't look alike. They're not the same size. But you know what? She's not going to see her grandkid put his flip-flops on wrong. And her grandkid's not going to have a Grammy see it. Now, this is my grandson that I just saw the other day. He's a pistol. This is an example of the right technology being used the wrong way. And I want to tell you, IV is a technology. There's a right way to use it and a wrong way to use it. The right way is to make sure that it is mixed properly, so when you administer it, you're administering the right thing. Let's take this thing home. Yeah, I look back at what it took for retail, what it did in the hospital world. But I look at the evidence. For administrations, the Brigham and Women's leads the way, but there are many other studies that give us even better evidence that say there's a reduction, a 41% reduction in non-timing related errors, 51% decrease in potential adverse drug events, 27% decrease in timing related medications, and some god-awful big number of documentation errors are avoided with the system. And then with preparations. The system that I just showed you is catching, after several million doses, is catching product selection rates at about 5.3%. That means 5.3% of the time the system stops the caregiver or the technician from putting the wrong ingredients in a bag. We build airplanes so that they're safer. And we would not think of building airplanes without barcoding. We track and trace marijuana from seed to sale. That's a drug. We do it for recreational and not for chemo. Looking forward, and here I wrap up. So let's look ahead to see if the dominoes will keep falling. Let's look out 10 years from now. I don't know what I'll do in 10 years from now if we're at 80% worldwide, but I'll do something special. I've been thinking about it. Here's my final shots at you. I've got 3. Keep telling stories that help others imagine. You imagine. Others don't think to imagine. They have imaginations too. They just need some help. They're not going to think about it if you don't tell the story. If we're going to make the global language of business also the global language of healthcare, it means that we're going to have to tell the stories to our hospital leaders, to physicians, to nurses, to drug companies, to passengers on airplanes, to family members, to junior hires, to retired people, to anybody who will listen, and to those who won't listen. We just need to keep telling the story. And you never know on whose ears it's going to fall. But I will tell you this, as you tell this story, almost everybody gets it. It's just that they need to hear it. And sometimes they need to hear it again. And sometimes it's not until the 3rd or 4th time that they get it. So we can't grow weary in telling the story, of telling the story. If we want people to bleed, we're going to have to hemorrhage on this one, my brothers and sisters. When you're tired of telling the same old story, others are just hearing it. Don't quit. Number 2, lobby your regulatory agencies to transfer imagination into implementation. They're not going to think of this on their own. They're not looking for things to do. They're not even thinking about it. But you need to be the fly that will not go away. You need to keep going at it. And some of you have grown weary in that battle. And you need some new encouragement. Encourage them. Plead with them. Scare them. Tell them your stories until they require every immediate drug package to have a barcode. And you know what barcodes to put on it. Finally, consider how compassion trumps passion. Often we say, my passion is XYZ. What's the difference between passion and compassion? I think it's this. Passion is what I'm excited about. Compassion is getting excited about what others need. And I want to tell you, if you want a meaningful life and a full life, not an easy life, because you will want to quit and want to quit. As a matter of fact, the easiest thing to do is to do nothing. The next easiest thing is to do the wrong thing. To do a good thing is hard. To do the best thing is really hard. But it's what our world needs. And so for patients, for caregivers, we're compassionate when we get excited and energized, though tired, to do what they need tirelessly. I would suggest a higher, more meaningful path is finding something. You know what we tell our kids in America? This is so embarrassing. We tell our kids in America, if you want to live a full life, find something that you're passionate about, something that you love, and then you'll never work another day in your life. And friends, that's just pure bullshit. You don't get tired of doing what you're doing? We all do. Professional athletes love playing, but they get tired from that. And it's a small percentage of our world that gets to elect what they get to do anyway. And that's the percentage of our world that probably needs us more than any. So I call you to consider compassion over passion, I think it trumps. Okay. Some years ago, we're out of here. Some years ago, I was with some colleagues in a meeting. Reluctantly, we attended the last session of the conference, and we were sitting in the back row so we could get out quickly. And I lost interest in the speaker. She was boring. She didn't know her subject. She thought she was funny, and I didn't think she was. And I whispered to my colleague next to me, I said, we're out of here. And he goes, and he whispered it down the lane to our other colleagues, and I got the thumbs up all the way down the thing. And so I said, but we can't all leave at once. It just wouldn't look right. Let me go, give it a minute, and then you come. Got the plan down. Roger, Roger, Roger. After what seemed like I was right by the back door. It was perfect. And I left. And what seemed like a very long minute to me, but eventually I had to admit that I'd walked into a closet. Now, I regret to say that I didn't stay in the closet until the other guys joined me. I want to say that you're staying in the room to the end of this inspiring meeting, and staying for my lecture is indicative of your staying power, of your passion, and more importantly, your compassion. And I want to thank you and leave you with a quote from Professor Dumbledore. In the Goblet of Fire on the last feast, he said, "Dark and difficult times lie ahead, Harry. Soon we must all face the choice between doing what is right and what is easy. But remember this, you have friends here. You're not alone." Though I have often felt like quitting, I'm so glad I didn't. No small amount of credit goes to some of you sitting right in this room, this community of encouragement for your fellowship, your dogged endurance. Thank you. Okay, we've done enough thinking for a while. It's time to return to our homelands and fulfill what we've imagined, okay? I'm going to put my email address up. I'm interested in what you've been thinking. Drop me a note. God bless.
Thank you, my dear.